life insurance won't pay out for a suicide. She has to believe it. So I'll pay you to assign an assassin. You choose who.
No. This is what we do. We go to every doctor. If they say it's hopeless, we go up the mountain, find a shaman.
Sweet. I've lived by the sword. I want to go out the same way.
You want to fight. You fight for your life.
I can't fight if I'm blind. Staggering around like a drunk, shitting myself. I don't want Macy to see me like that.
The people murdered by that man were not ordinary people. They were all the most famous assassins in the world. However, when facing Joe, the greatest assassin in Europe, even if they came in greater numbers, it would still be hopeless. But Joe himself was the one who brought disaster upon himself. He had set a contract with a bounty on his own life, inviting all the assassins in the world to come and take his head. At first, Joe had no intention of resisting. $2 million would easily belong to anyone who completed the mission, but a sudden incident made him change, and everything was related to a woman. A few days earlier in an opera house where a contemporary art performance was taking place, a boss was sitting in the VIP room quietly enjoying it. Outside, the bodyguards were patrolling. One of them was fixing his clothes in the mirror. Suddenly, from the corner of his eye, he saw a black leather shoe sticking out from under the curtain. His heart tightened. He tiptoed forward and yanked the curtain open. Joe appeared, his gaze calm like a frozen lake. He turned and walked straight toward the target's room, pretending to be on the phone. A bodyguard at the end of the hallway stepped forward to block him. Before he could react, Joe raised his hand and fired. The silenced shot made only a muffled sound, and the bodyguard silently collapsed onto the carpet. When he lifted the curtain and entered, the target turned his head, saw Joe, and immediately understood that he could not escape death. He hurriedly offered 3 times the price to beg for his life, but the only reply was, "The game is not played that way," and the trigger was pulled. The woman with him was stunned with fear. Joe signaled her to keep quiet. The woman quickly ran outside right into the guard at the door. The guard pulled out his radio to call his teammates but only heard static in the speaker. He realized the other 2 had already been taken down. When he pushed the door open, he saw only his boss slumped over the table. Joe turned to leave, but suddenly a sharp pain struck his temple. Everything before his eyes began to blur. He had to cling to the wall to try to stay upright. On the other side, the bodyguard ran into the hallway. He bumped into the opera house security staff and was immediately stopped under suspicion. Without a word, he pulled out a gun and shot the security guard dead, then rushed into a room and jumped onto the stage. But before he could steady himself, a bullet from the upper floor struck him, causing him to collapse right in the middle of the stage. The entire hall instantly erupted. Screams like a tidal wave engulfed the opera house. The dancer named Maze was knocked down by the panicked crowd. Thousands of feet trampled chaotically around her as she was almost consumed by fear. A strong hand lifted her up. Only when she was set down at the emergency exit behind the theater did Maze clearly see the man who had carried her. A chiseled face, a faint scar on his eyebrow, and eyes that held a weariness she could not understand. She was just about to ask his name when suddenly Joe felt his head splitting with pain. Maze wanted to ask the bystanders if anyone had painkillers, but when she turned back, the man had already disappeared into the night. When Joe returned home, the dizziness had not faded. He reached for the bottle of painkillers, but his fingertips touched something cold. It was a pink phone, its lock screen showing a ballerina. He must have stuffed it into his pocket when carrying Maze. The next day, Joe went to the hospital for an MRI scan. The doctor shook his head. He pointed at the scan and said the brain temporarily showed no pathological signs. But his work certainly could not avoid severe impacts, some soft tissue injuries or nerve compression that the MRI could not detect. The doctor advised him that it was time to reconsider his lifestyle. Joe said nothing, left behind a tube of blood, and walked away. He turned to meet his boss Zvi. The apartment was filled with the smell of cigars. Joe said that he had seen the doctor. A trace of worry flashed in Zvi's eyes, but Joe reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. He continued speaking about how he had begun to doubt the reason he killed people. Zvi said that the targets were all cruel and ruthless people, so he was acting on behalf of heaven. After hearing this, Joe asked how people would judge him after he died. Zvi replied that it was God's matter. Our work is to send those scums to meet God. Joe nodded and received the reward of $500,000 for this mission. Zvi advised him to rest for a while and not to forget life because of work. After hearing this, Joe again remembered that pink phone. Another scene appeared. The figure of Maze spun on the glass of the dance studio. Joe stood quietly at the door, waiting for her to stop before stepping forward to return the phone. Maze's eyes lit up and her cheeks flushed pink. She said she was very grateful for what happened yesterday and wanted to invite him to dinner. Joe was about to refuse when Mays pulled out a photo and wrote her phone number on the back. Leaving the studio, Joe clenched the photo and threw it into the trash. But after just a few steps, he stopped, turned back, and picked the photo out of the trash. In the evening, Joe sat by the window facing the phone screen. He typed and erased, then finally sent a message. "Are you free tonight?" When night fell in the candlelit restaurant, Mays smiled brightly and told interesting stories about the dance troupe. Joe listened, and a rare smile appeared on his face. Mays said that since she was a child, she had dreamed of dancing ballet. To have enough money for her studies, her mother had worked 2 jobs every day without a single complaint. For that reason, ballet for her was not simply a hobby. Joe also confided that he was an orphan. At 18, he held the enlistment papers and entered the army. Now he was still doing the same work, but deep down he had long planned to retire. The conversation between the two became comfortable and strangely harmonious. At some point, their eyes toward each other grew even brighter. In the days that followed, the two began to date frequently. Joe spent his free time handling a few remaining missions, almost always staying by Mays's side. They were immersed in intimate love, inseparable. Everything went on as if heading toward marriage until the unexpected struck. The blood test results had arrived. Joe had Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a fatal illness that would gradually destroy neurological function. For an assassin, losing control of the nervous system was almost the same as ending his career. What was more cruel was that this disease had no precedent for cure, and he had only 3 months left to live. The doctor's words were like an ice block pressed straight into Joe's heart. He could not accept this result. Having just found the person he wanted to spend his whole life with now, he was forced to face a predestined separation. His heart was filled with helplessness. Leaving the hospital, Joe drove home. He searched online for information about the disease. Hundreds of thousands of patients around the world, but not a single case had been cured. He had only 3 months to live. Thinking of this, Joe took out his gun. But when he saw the photo of himself and Mays embracing on the phone, he felt that he needed to do something before leaving. So he went to his boss, Zvi. For Joe, Zvi was not only a boss, but also like a relative, a teacher, and a friend. When Joe told him about his illness, Zvi was also extremely shocked. He had not expected things to be so serious, as if he had already made up his mind. Joe took out part of his savings and asked Zvi to help him buy an accident insurance policy with Mays as the beneficiary. However, accident insurance does not cover suicide or natural death, so he was willing to pay money for Zvi to hire assassins to kill him. Zvi looked at Joe as if he were his own son. Although he could not give him hope, he also did not want to do something so cruel. Feelings are invisible, things that sometimes can make people ache to the bone. Joe understood Zvi's thoughts. He said nothing more, stood up and left his place. He turned and went in another direction. That place was the home of Mariana, his arch-enemy for many years. As soon as they met, Joe said he wanted to sign a contract with her. Mariana introduced Joe to her henchman Mike and said that Joe was the top assassin in Europe. Then Joe explained his purpose. He was willing to pay $2 million for Mariana to find someone to kill him. Mariana was stunned when she heard this. She had not expected the one she always wanted to eliminate would take the initiative to make such a request. Without hesitation, she immediately agreed. The two arranged to begin the mission after midnight. After speaking, Joe turned and left. As soon as Joe had left, Mariana impatiently announced the manhunt. Because Joe was a formidable opponent, Mariana had specially chosen a team of assassins ranked among the top in the world. They were determined to deal with Joe in the very first round. After arranging everything, Joe did not return home but went to the opera house to wait for Mays to finish work. The two met still as affectionate as before. Happiness shone in their eyes, and all of those moments were recorded by Mike, Mariana's henchman, on his phone. After a few short stories, Mays realized that Joe seemed to have something on his mind. She wanted to know what had happened to him, but unexpectedly, Joe directly broke up with her. He needed to reconsider what he truly wanted. Mays said that Joe was talking nonsense because clearly the two of them could bring happiness to each other. Clearly they loved each other deeply, but from Joe's attitude, she realized he was determined. After kissing him, she turned and walked away without looking back once. Joe was in extreme pain, but could only watch as Mays left. It seemed that was the only thing he could do. Not long after Joe returned home, he did not lock the door and even turned on all the lights. After a few glasses of strong liquor, he gathered the courage to send Mays a voice message. It was a farewell monologue explaining that he was forced to break up because of illness. He said that Mays was the one he had been searching for his entire life. Mays, drowning in sorrow, immediately saw Joe's voice message. Just as she was listening, Joe received a call from his private doctor. The doctor informed Joe that he did did not have Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It was an error by the laboratory staff. They had confused his records with another patient's. Joe asked about his headaches and double vision. The doctor said the cause was not yet clear. He asked if he had checked his eyes, as it could be the nerves around the eyes causing the headaches. At this time, there were only 5 minutes left before the manhunt began. Joe was extremely worried. At the same time, the first team of assassins had arrived under his building. They were a Korean team, known for their brutal and flamboyant style. After each mission, the scene was usually filled with many deaths in various ways. The weapons they used were extremely diverse. Because Joe had not locked the door, they easily entered the room. Joe said this was a mistake and that he wanted to cancel the contract. But the assassins only cared about money. After the leader gave the order, the manhunt officially began. The assassin in the red shirt made flashy moves but was knocked down by Joe. Then, Joe's shoulder was slashed. He immediately faced the female assassin wielding an axe. Without using too much effort, just with a sequence of moves, he quickly defeated her. The assassin in red lost control of his emotions when he saw this, but against absolute strength, anger, and screaming were useless. He even hastened his own death. Immediately after, the boss ordered his men with samurai swords to continue the attack. As a result, the sword had not yet touched Joe before it was knocked away by a single strike. Then, the red-haired woman advanced with a strange weapon. She looked fierce, swinging powerfully, and even managed to cut Joe's shoulder. But when Joe counterattacked, she could not withstand even one blow. After finishing off all his subordinates, the boss still appeared calm, his mouth constantly mocking and provoking. However, what no one expected was that he was actually the weakest. Afterward, Joe even lit him a cigarette. At this time, the red-haired woman was still not completely dead. She staggered to her feet. Joe did not bother to pay attention, having single-handedly defeated the third-ranked assassin team in the world. After that, Joe called Mariana to request canceling the contract. He was willing to give Mariana $2 million without asking for it back. But Mariana refused because Joe had killed her father years ago. Now that she finally had the chance to eliminate Joe, she did not want to give it up. She even threatened to summon all the strongest assassins in Europe for a fight to the death with Joe. Just after hanging up the phone, Joe was chased by 2 men on motorcycles. They used their bikes as weapons, ramming straight into him. At first, Joe was a little flustered. One of them even mocked that this was not personal vengeance, just business. Joe knew that fighting on the ground was disadvantageous for him. He picked up a steel bar, hid behind a container, and directly struck one of them off his bike, then stomped his head to pieces. The other, seeing his comrade dead, went mad. After dealing with him, Joe immediately ran towards Zvi's house. Meanwhile, Mariana had raised the bounty to $4 million and announced a global manhunt. The top assassins who once feared Joe were also tempted when they saw the $4 million. Quickly, Joe arrived at Zvi's house and he bandaged his wound. Zvi's wife Sharon stepped forward and offered to adjust his bones. In the past, she had learned this skill at a bone-setting shop in the Chinatown neighborhood. Her hands were both precise and steady. Zvi stood nearby, afraid she might accidentally break Joe's neck. Joe suddenly cried out, but not from pain. The throbbing in his temples suddenly became quiet. The overlapping lights before his eyes disappeared, and the dizziness of the past days also faded. He could not believe it, and hugged Sharon tightly. The vertigo that had tormented him for so long had finally vanished. On Mariana's side, she privately called the assassin Creighton. She sent him a photo of Maze. This was the card to control Joe, but this help was not free. Mariana had a nephew preparing to step into the assassin world, and she hoped Creighton would mentor him. However, when they met, Creighton discovered that the nephew was just a hip-hop kid who talked too much. Elsewhere, Maze received a call from Joe. He told her to quickly find a hiding place because both of them were unsafe. He said to wait for him to finish everything, then he would come to her. Although Maze did not understand why she had to hide, she still obeyed Joe and returned home to pack her belongings. At that moment, her phone rang again with a message from the bank. The number 500,000 euros on the screen dazzled her eyes. Without time to think, Maze hurriedly carried her things out of the house. But as soon as she stepped outside, she saw a large man blocking the door. On the other side was a skinny man. Creighton said that Joe had told him to come and pick up his girlfriend, but Mace knew she could not trust anyone now. Joe had chosen the location for the final battle. He also borrowed some explosives from Zvi and immediately drove to an abandoned old castle. It was the place where Zvi had once carried out his last mission. Deep in the forest, surrounded by ruined factories and broken walls, it was truly a living coffin. He deliberately exposed his whereabouts, preparing to end everything here. But Mariana was even more ruthless. She directly called Mike to summon mercenaries. Joe could take down a few reckless men with knives, but could he defeat a fully armed army? The assassins on the way quickly received the information from Mike. After reading it, they could not hide their excitement, pressing the accelerator harder as they sped toward the castle. Joe was busy setting traps with explosives. He hid the charges switches in concealed places and laid the wires across the hallway floor. Every step was measured with precise angles. Not long after, the first team of assassins stormed into the castle, raising their guns to search. Joe noticed the movement and immediately threw a grenade. A curse mixed with the explosion rang out. Joe jumped to the lower floor to fight two assassins. Though he managed to kill one, he had difficulty when facing the thin assassin. When the two brothers began to cooperate, his situation became even more difficult. Seeing Joe overwhelmed, the two grew more arrogant. But Joe calmly pulled the trap switch successfully, using a bullhorn to kill one of them. The other, seeing his brother killed immediately, went berserk. 1 against 2 might have been difficult, but 1 against 1 Joe did not fear. He quickly finished the opponent. Just as he caught his breath, 2 female assassins attacked. Joe dodged bullets while retreating. The 2 women kept throwing grenades, covering him in dust. A fierce gunfight broke out instantly. Seeing Joe out of ammo, 1 assassin tried to approach. Joe hurriedly dragged the injured woman into the corner, pulled the grenade pin from her body, and with all his strength hurled her away. The explosion blasted him into the hallway. Joe then encountered another male assassin who was a dancer. They immediately engaged in combat. This assassin reacted swiftly, her moves agile, like a dancer performing powerful steps. Joe was momentarily flustered, but thanks to his superior physique, the opponent still could not truly overpower him. Seeing that their strength was equal, the two decided to duel with swords. With the advantage of the terrain after a fierce battle, Joe finally defeated the dancer assassin. At that moment, Joe's phone suddenly rang. The screen showed an incoming call from Maze. However, the voice on the other end was the assassin Creighton. He had also arrived. Creighton's demand was straightforward: use Maze to threaten kill Joe and take $4 million. Joe decided to trade himself for Maze's safety. However, before Joe could finish speaking, Mike had already led the mercenary team in. Joe immediately prepared himself. The mercenaries launched a sudden attack inside the mansion, unaware that Joe had already dug their graves. It must be admitted that this mercenary team was quite professional. They discovered the tripwires under their feet, but they did not expect that the bombs could also be detonated remotely. The remaining mercenaries did not stop but continued to press Joe. Joe seized the opportunity, struck down one, quickly grabbed his weapon, and escaped successfully through the tunnel. Creighton was already waiting at the tunnel exit. Joe knew Maze was in his hands, so he obediently threw down his weapon. Creighton took out his phone, preparing to order his men to bring Maze over. But unexpectedly, Maze had already noticed that the kid guarding her was not very sharp. She pretended her legs were numb and asked to get out of the car to walk a little. The kid did not think much and let her out. Maze deliberately fell next to a stick. Taking advantage of his carelessness, she grabbed the stick, knocked him out, stole the car, and rushed straight toward the mansion. Just as Creighton was angrily shouting into the phone, a car suddenly rushed forward and rammed straight into him. Creighton was struck, stunned, and collapsed on the ground, unable to move. Maze hurriedly shouted for Joe to get in the car. Mike opened fire wildly, but the two still managed to escape. At that moment, the kid walked up to Creighton, explained the reason, and said perhaps he was not suited for this profession. Creighton and Mike met. Creighton said that $4 million was not enough. He wanted $6 million. Mike said he would report to his superiors. On the road, Joe told Maze everything that had happened recently. His assassin identity, Mariana's manhunt, all the battles and struggles. After hearing it all, Maze gripped the steering wheel tightly. The man she had loved all this time was actually an assassin. Joe hurriedly explained that he only killed bad people and that he had already retired. Unexpectedly, Maze said that was good because she did not want to have children with an assassin. She continued saying that she was pregnant. A few nights ago, she had intended to tell Joe, but that was the night he had asked to break up. Joe was startled about to say something when Maze suddenly collapsed onto the passenger seat. He quickly took over the wheel and pulled the car to the side of the road. At that moment, he discovered her shoulder had been hit by a bullet. Fortunately, the wound was not deep. Joe carried her into a nearby church. He was about to look for supplies to treat the wound when a priest stepped out from a room. Seeing Maze lying on the floor, the priest was about to help when she suddenly opened her eyes. The fainting earlier had only been her body's self-protection mechanism. Seeing that Maze was fine, Joe suddenly knelt on one knee and proposed to her. The witness, of course, was the priest before them, but the priest had one request. Joe had to confess. No matter how urgent the time, he still had to make time. So, the two sat in the confessional. Joe began listing his recent missions and methods of killing, which shocked the priest. In all his years of service, he had never heard of such bizarre sins. But in the end, he still absolved Joe and advised him not to kill anymore. Joe helplessly said that later there might be some cases of legitimate self-defense. And so under the priest's witness, their wedding began. When it came time to exchange rings, Joe took a grenade pin from his pocket, treating it as a wedding ring. However, before they could finish their vows, Creighton suddenly burst in and fired at Joe. The bullet accidentally struck the priest. Seeing Joe's helpless look, Creighton arrogantly cursed. Before he could finish speaking, a grenade was thrown at Joe's feet. Mike had arrived with the mercenary team. He said the boss did not want to pay $6 million, so he was told to deal with Creighton as well. A chaotic battle immediately broke out. Creighton and Joe temporarily fought on the same side, cooperating to kill several mercenaries. Mike ordered his men to capture Creighton. Then, regardless of friend or foe, he threw 2 grenades, killing his own men and blasting Creighton away. A nearby shelf was blown over and fell on Creighton. Mike approached about to pull the trigger, when suddenly, a chill ran down his back. Mike saw that Joe was out of bullets and began mocking again. But the very next moment, his head exploded. No one had expected the one who pulled the trigger was Maze. Joe reassured her that it was all right. But what Maze was concerned about was Creighton lying on the ground. After the battle ended, Mariana was packing her things to escape when Zvi suddenly appeared behind her. Hiring mercenaries to carry out the work of assassins, Mariana had violated the rules of the Assassin Alliance. The only ending awaiting her was a bullet. In the end, Joe and Maze returned to that church. They donated money to help the priest rebuild it. The two held their wedding under the witness of everyone. In the days that followed, there were no more pursuits or killings, only peace and happiness awaiting a new life. The movie ends here. The Killer's Game portrayed the assassin world as a brutal race in work. Joe, played by Bautista, is a killer. He can only use his free time to be with his girlfriend. The action scenes were creatively staged, such as the assassination at the opera house. The sound of gunfire and the swing of the dancer's hair blended seamlessly. The red of blood contrasted with the color of the ballet dress. This design was fresher compared to ordinary gunfight scenes, but the romantic subplot was somewhat unnecessary. Assassins hunting clients for performance. Assassins taking jobs as if doing part-time work. Turning killing into a profession, in fact, contained satire about capitalist society. No matter how special the job in the end, it also became a position that could be replaced. What is more thought-provoking is the attitude toward violence. Joe believed he was enforcing justice, but the priest said killing is killing. Just like in reality, some people believe violence can solve problems without realizing they may have become tools for others. Assassins collecting bounties after killing like influencers on social media, relying on violent content for views. This exposes the reality that violence is being commercialized. The construction of the villains was still monotonous. Apart from showing a cool appearance, they did not have much depth. They left the game too early, failing to create significant conflict. Overall, the film still had its highlights. Although the content was not profound enough, the perspective was quite unique, and it was also a visually entertaining movie. Watching it could still bring satisfaction. Today's story ends here. Thank you for watching the movie. What do you think of this film?